So welcome, good morning everybody to our first panel. As already mentioned, it's around sustainability. The title of the panel, Greening the Aerospace Supply Chain, Climate-Driven Path to Resource and Energy Efficiency. So the focus will be less on SAF, more on what else can the aerospace supply chain do to become more sustainable. For this discussion, I have an esteemed panel here. Let me briefly introduce to my right Dr. Sandra Bour Schaeffer. She's Senior Vice President, Procurement Cabin at Airbus, so representing the OEM perspective and the cabin side mainly, if you will. Then we have Carsten Becker. He is Chief Executive Officer, ELG Utica Alloys. He is in the area of recycling. He'll talk more about this. Then we have Andreas Fehring. He is Chief Operating Officer at Volocopter, representing a different segment of the aerospace supply chain. We'll talk, I guess, a lot about batteries. And then we have Patrick Marous here. He's Global Chief Executive Officer at thyssenkrupp Aerospace, representing more the upstream side, the input material into aerospace production. So I tried to sort this out a little bit, but in the discussion, I'm sure we'll dive into this. I encourage you to ask questions. Slido is up, as you can see. Please address your question to a specific member of the panel or to the panel in general. When it comes to sustainability, I already mentioned the focus also yesterday in the discussion has been a lot about engines and about SAF, reduction of CO2 emission, which is definitely critically important. However, which other areas of sustainability should the industry pay attention to and why, besides SAF? Maybe Sandra, may I ask you to start?
Of course, with pleasure, thank you. Before I start, maybe again the context. Today, if we look at the emission of our operations, they represent 97%. So the scope 3 is very important, and that's why engines play a particular role, but there are other things, and I will be giving examples. 2% are ground operation, and 1% our scope 1 and 3. And clearly, we want to act on all of them. So if we talk about the scope 3 and the aircraft, it's about reducing the emission, and one big lever to reduce the emission is actually weight. And you talked about it. If we take the example of cabin, you all know the cabin, you experienced it many times in your life. There are a number of initiatives there really aiming at weight reduction. The seat supplier today come, for example, with seats where they try even in business class or in first class to get rid, more in business class, to get rid of the actuator system, to have manual operation of the seat to reduce weight. They introduce recycled material, for example. We can look into the partitions where we go into biometric partitions. The idea is to reduce the weight. We could reduce the weight by 40%. We go into new materials for sidewalls, for ceilings, which are recyclable. So all those elements contribute to either weight reduction or the full life cycle assessment, which is very important. And I think to that respect, it's interesting to know that we have started an airspace eco-calculator that's very specific for the cabin. The aim is to gather all the elements of the different inputs in the cabin from our suppliers, such that they share the impact of the full life cycle of their different elements. So an airline, when they choose the interior of their cabin, they will know what is the impact of this given seat, for example, on cradle to grave, basically, on the design, on the operation, with different factors that will be made available to them to have this transparency and be able to make the right choice. That would be one example.
Okay. Thank you very much also for explaining the percentages of impact. Fully agree that flying SAF, of course, is a major impact, but we'll talk about the others. Patrick, may I ask you next? Is providing input material into the industry. So what else can the industry and also particular suppliers to the industry do to have a positive impact on sustainability?
Sure. I mean, we've been talking about sustainable aviation fuel and the operations of a plane a lot. I think the focus will turn to input material. We are now seeing more and more customers asking us, actually, can you provide green aluminum? Can you provide green steel? What are you doing in your scope in order to reduce CO2 emissions? It's the beginning. It's not that people are rushing, but people are starting asking questions. And I think it is a good question. We're seeing it in other industries. For example, thyssenkrupp is working with the aluminum mill Novelis on an aluminum circular project where we look for electric vehicles. How can we actually do the end-to-end cycle of recycling? And we will talk about recycling with Carsten in a minute, I guess. We haven't talked about this yet. What happens with end-of-life planes? How can we make use of parts? Is there a structured way of calculating the CO2 emissions end-to-end? As thyssenkrupp, we have just invested into a voluntary carbon desk to actually trace from the beginning, so from the mother plate to the part which goes into a plane, which then potentially can be recycled at end of life. So I think people are aware that there are way more options than just sustainable aviation fuel. We should also talk about inventory in the supply chain. This is where a lot of CO2, and let's not even talk about money, let's talk also about emissions, which are in the supply chain. We have, unfortunately, in this industry, the case that the forecast is not really good, starting from the OEM going down to the tier 3s. Everybody needs to have buffer stock, security stock. That means there's a lot of inefficiency in the supply chain, and this inefficiency is not only very costly, it is also very unhealthy from a sustainable point of view. So inventory, visibility along the supply chain, forecast accuracy, what can we do in order to reduce the material here?
Okay, that's interesting. Yesterday with the executive workshop, I think you have not been there in this workshop, but this was a major topic always.
Absolutely.
Inventory, forecast, visibility, and
Yes.
now you relate it to sustainability. This was not the major focus yesterday. So thank you, Patrick. May I ask you, Carsten, also, what else can the industry do besides SAF? You are more on the downstream collecting side. What is your perspective on this?
I think we have to say that the industry is actually very good at recycling already. And when we talk about circular economy, we're doing it in large parts already today, right? So what we do is we collect metal scrap from primary production, from ingot to part, which Patrick or TK Aerospace and others store until it goes actually into the flying product, right? And take that, process the material, and bring it back. And the collection is really worldwide. And today, I think the best in the industry already have about 50% of the raw materials that they're using a grip on in the supply chain, that they know where it's being processed, and that they actually can bring it back. So we're actually very good, and we are actually better, right, than the automotive industry, because we understand how to segregate the material to make it clean, to actually bring it back, to reuse it. And this is something where we really have to look into the supply chain and deeper and understand where is the material sitting so we can bring it back. And that is at the stage of new production, that is at the stage of MRO, where parts basically in a life cycle have to be exchanged, and that is also at the part of end of life, so that we really can reuse what you said, Sandra, the materials we are envisioning. And the next step we actually have to take is we have to look at the industry, for example, as material passport. Already in the design of the aircraft, in the design of the product, what can we do? And I think, Andreas, you can talk a lot about that, being a young company, having a new product, what requirements also we will be facing, because what is totally clear, the regulators will force us to do more recycling, to build circular loops, to bring back the material, to reduce that usage, and with that also reduce the CO2 emissions. So this is really what we should focus on, and I think we are doing quite well. But it's, again, the topic also we discussed yesterday. It's a lot about collaboration, communication, sharing data, which today we have in pockets, but we don't all know. And that is what's making it so hard to really find the optimal solution.
Okay, thank you very much. Andreas, before I get to you, I didn't forget you. Let me address a question to Patrick and to Carsten. The first one, how is the interlinkage between global primary and secondary material chains? Who is orchestrating it?
Nobody.
Carsten,
very
that's a
easy
clear answer.
Yeah, I would say there's no orchestration, right? I think, you know, I think we as ELG Utica Alloys and TK Aerospace and all those who are in raw materials, they're trying to do their best to keep the supply chain running, but nobody's orchestrating it, and this is also why we see material shortages today in the supply chain.
It's very, very inefficient, honestly speaking, and I'm wondering why we are not tackling this topic and why also the OEMs, sorry Sandra, are not putting more focus on that. Basically, if you look at us or others, obviously, delivering the input material, we know exactly which tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 is operating at what stage where globally. We should then inform somebody like Carsten about, we have delivered, now scrap is being produced, please pick it up at the right moment, at the right time, and revert it into the cycle. It is happening, but it's not happening in an orchestrated way.
Okay. So the question says, who is orchestrating it? And you both say, oh, nobody really. Who should orchestrate it? The OEM?
Well, we can do it as a service. That's not a problem. The question is, who's paying for that? You know, somebody needs to pay at the end. But the possibilities are there. You know, it's maybe not as complicated as we think. As Carsten said, informations are in pockets and silos. How can we connect it, and who has an interest in doing so? In my opinion, it's the OEM or the large tier 1 who has an interest in doing so. And then we can come to Volocopter, where they can do it by design because they start, right? So it's interesting. Yeah? We have established supply chains and we have establishing supply chains. Maybe here, by design, you guys are doing it.
Okay, thank you for giving the lead to Andreas. Now we go from the classical aircraft to a new type of aircraft.
Yeah, I have to say I feel relatively comfortable because I have a very short legacy in the product itself. We are developing a new technology, and for sure flying electrical in terms of CO2 footprint is a good subject, but you have to look at the entire value chain of the product. And we are now for sure in the finals to certify our product. But what do we do in terms of sustainability in the production process? And especially when you look to the battery system, which is the part which is, in terms of CO2 footprint, the area which is the biggest one we are working on at the moment. Roughly 25% of what we have in terms of CO2 footprint goes in the production of the batteries. Then more than this, 45% is going to the charging of the batteries. And the other biggest part is in the operation itself, when you have a Voloport, where you operate the aircraft from. This is the area. In terms of production, we are relatively low. 1-2% is the contribution in our own facilities for the CO2 emission. The other part is what we do, let's say, with knowing the data of our product. And I guess this is something where I feel relatively comfortable compared to other OEMs, because it is not only looking in the production of new aircraft at the moment, it is also to support the aircraft which are in service. And what we do on this subject, because we have, let's say, several thousand aircraft which are in service. They need to be maintained, they need to be supported, and also here there is a critical subject where we need to look at. Here I can already in our area take a look what we do in terms of green energy we are using for our production facilities on our own. We are requesting for sure, as it was already said, that our suppliers are working with green energy when producing their parts. But the biggest subject is on the battery side, the recycling approach, what we do here. On one side, in terms of getting a hand on the raw material, which are in the battery cells. On the other side as well, we have a battery itself. The cells is not the most costly part in it, but everything which is linked to the energy management system. And here as well, going into the area of reusability of components in this area. This is something where we need to look at. It is not only, let's say, to destroy what we have built, but let's say to disassemble and to bring components of this area back into service. Here we need to look at. It is a critical subject in the aviation industry to all the safety regulations we have, but it is something where we need to look at because this area will grow as raw materials are more and more limited in terms of access in the market. And here, I guess, there is the entire community requested to find a solution for.
Okay, thank you very much. You mentioned, you talked about the entire aviation industry. For you, I think battery is an important topic. What do you say, or how do you counter the common criticism? What battery, if you look at the life cycle of the battery, then the picture might be a little different. So what can you do? What do you do to take this life cycle perspective into consideration?
Yeah, for the batteries, the subject is first of all, how are you producing the battery cells? Because this is the area which is from the CO2 emission perspective, the subject where there is the key. We are working with suppliers which are using mainly in their production process green energy in order to produce this, and they are building up new factories in countries where producing with green energy is maximum supported. In Canada, for example, or in the eastern part of the world. Also here, when you are building new factories, the key request is to use green energy in the production process. But once it is produced, it is for sure how long are the batteries, or the cells and batteries usable. So here, a key approach is to collect data and to do a continuous analysis of the aging of the batteries itself. Because a battery cell is not, let's say, like we are used to buy in a supermarket. They are all looking identical, and we just try to buy something cheap. A battery cell is like a person. Every cell is individually. So you have to really understand how you are collecting the data, bringing the right pairing of the individual battery cells together, and then trying to have a product which has the maximum utilization time. Charging targets of the futures are to be, let's say, for batteries at the level of 2,500 cycles, charging cycles. And then, based on the requirements you have from the airworthiness perspective, you need to exchange then the battery pack or the cells, or however your design looks like, what is the easiest way to do it. But the point is you need to understand when this point is reached. It is not only that you account the number of cycles, because as I said, the cells are behaving differently. So the continuous measurement of the performance of the cells is a key subject. Here we are using a dedicated software and data collection approach, where during operation, even during flight, we are collecting data and trying to optimize the operational profile. But on the other side as well, you can call it in a regular maintenance cycle, we are measuring the performance of the batteries in terms of decharging and recharging quality. Okay. So this is very important.
Okay. So we'll get to also transparency data later again. But what you explained, there are a number of things you consider and the industry considers concerning the criticism of battery using. Let me go to one of the questions. Sandra, yours. At Airbus, how do you treat materials like CFRP, CFK that are hard to recycle? How much of that material can be used again after end of life? We all know some materials are easier to recycle, and maybe Carsten material, your company selected materials that are probably easier to recycle than others. Can you say something about this question, or recyclability of material in general? How do you categorize that? What's easy to do? What's hard to do? What do you consider? Where do you invest into for recycling purposes?
I'll probably extend a bit the question. It's about finding an optimum, right? And as I said it, the biggest impact is actually our airplanes flying. And one of the biggest impact is weight. So CFRP might be slightly more difficult to recycle or more difficult to recycle than aluminium. The question is, over the whole life cycle, is it the best optimum because it significantly reduces weight and therefore it significantly reduces the operation and therefore maybe it is actually a good choice. So we need to take always a holistic view and have really this from the beginning until the very end of the operation in mind to select the right material and decide what is the sweet spot, if I may say, for each type of application we have and each need of material. Then, this being said, once you have chosen a material, clearly there is extensive work being done to see how can we recycle it, how can we reuse it, what can we do with scrap. There are even ideas like people who are taking part of the aircraft and sell them back as furniture afterwards. So there are thousands of different ideas on how you can reuse and recycle the materials. And clearly there's an extensive work being done on that for the different types of materials we are having, but also to look into new materials, which for the new applications will have a much easier way to recycle them.
Okay, maybe Carsten, I know your company has tried some materials, some were successful, others not. Maybe you can comment on this.
We've tried CFRP to recycle that, and it's totally possible, but I wouldn't call it recycling. We differ actually. Recycling for us is you recycle one-to-one. So the material actually has the same use as it had originally. Whereas CFRP, you cannot recycle, it's downcycling. The aerospace industry is the largest producer of carbon fiber scrap, right? And you cannot bring it back into the aircraft where it's used in the fuselage or in the wings as it was intended to. So you downcycle the product. The downcycling is a very energy-intensive process to separate the fiber from the resin. And then the question is, into what end product does it go? There were initiatives in the industry to also look at side panels of the interior of the aircraft and other things, but there was no product use. So really what we have to think about, right, is what is the use after the life, or after the production, after the part that is intended for the product, what are we going to do with it? And this is something where I think we need to put more effort in to understand, are we going to make furniture out of it, or are we going to make cabin interiors out of it? We looked at basically hoods for a car. But still, it's a very expensive product. And then it's also a question of, is it economically viable? All right, and this is what we need to understand from the very beginning. Is there an economically viable use of that material? And what does that look like? And typically the engineer, right, and once you've designed your cabin, he might not look at the afterlife. And I think this is something where we need to work closer together as an industry to understand what can be done with this material if we cannot fully recycle it one-to-one, if we downcycle it.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me take one more question, either, I guess, Patrick or maybe Patrick asks that, or Carsten. What role does recycling play in super alloys, titanium, aluminum, CFK? You partially answered that already. Patrick?
That is Carsten's.
Well, it plays an absolutely big role, right? I mean, the super alloys mainly sit in the engines, and that is fully recyclable, right? At buy-to-fly ratios of 8-to-1, you have somewhere in the new production process 70 to 80% of scrap, and that is actually already today brought back. We process that material, and then it's brought back to the melter. So we have that circular economy already going. Right? It's just the question of how do we actually make the supply chain fully transparent so that we understand where this sits, and it's for super alloys, titanium, it's also for aluminum, and also for CFK. Aluminum is economically more challenging because super alloys and titanium have a much, much higher product value, right? Aluminum has a much lower product value, so the question is how can you bring that back? Right, and is it economically viable, or how can you make it economically viable to bring it back? Because it's the plain vanilla item in aerospace, and what does it cost us? It's a question also of cost to really establish the circular loop.
Okay, let me turn to another line of thought. you talked briefly about digitalization, transparency, knowing which material is used, how often it has been used. How far is the industry with regard to using technology, having the transparency over the materials that are in the process, that have been built in? And is that information shared? In the end, it's about suppliers, OEMs. Is there transparency about the materials, the quality of the materials? There's also the term Carsten mentioned, material passport. It's also not a document, it's data in the end. So how far is the industry there? And I guess that needs to be done in order to move forward in more recycling.
No, absolutely. I would say, how far are we? Not far. Interestingly, the technology is there. I think that all of us here in the room are experimenting with it or already have some proof points, but it's still within your own silo. Are we connecting with each other? No. Are there some projects where maybe for the digital passport or blockchain experiments, we will connect 1 or 2 tiers? Yes, there are things running. But if you think about what is possible, technologically already today, we are far, far behind. Other industries are way ahead. And there is one big problem. It's not the technology, it's trust. Why should I deliver my data to the next tier? Or why should I deliver data to the OEM? What will the OEM do with this data? I don't think that we have really talked about the fundamental issue, which is not the technology. It is more about the trust and what we want to do. If we use the technology in the right way, if trust is there, it would be way easier for Carsten and me to collaborate. We would actually have a benefit. I was joking a little bit as who's going to pay for that. Even if we would just optimize ourselves in the silo, that already would be a huge benefit. Not only commercially, I'm also talking from a sustainability point of view. I think we have way to go. And I don't know, Carsten, it is who's doing the first step, I guess, right? It's like who's trusting whom the first, yeah? It's like who's doing the leap of faith, I guess?
I find this interesting. I asked digitalization, and you go to the soft factors, but I fully agree.
But no, but the funny thing is technology is moving ahead at a pace unseen before, right? And I think everybody acknowledges that and sees that in his or her own environment. But it's the usage of technology.
Okay.
You know, it's not what is possible. Or Sandra, I don't know what you
Sandra,
say.
maybe you can.
You guys are pushing also, yeah?
What we all share is that transparency is absolutely key. We know that we can optimize the overall thing if we have the sufficient knowledge of not only our tier ones, but the whole supply chain. And I think the next era project is very much in line with that. It's about connecting the different suppliers and the different landscape with each other. It's about information on the supplier, clearly, but it's also about us giving more information on the capability and the capacity, the requirements, and it's about compliance. So it's about having the data that makes our industry work in a common platform to share it. And I think this is something we have thought about with other big suppliers. And the idea is to roll it out and to have something that is also available and applicable for smaller players that are not overwhelmed or overtaken by the complexity of the thing. So the idea, in my view, is to create this transparency. Yes, of course, it comes with a level of trust, but at the end, if we have a better view on capacity on needs, for example, we can all better plan and we can all have a much economic viable solution towards a wrap-up, for example, or other topics. So I think transparency is key. I see the industry starting to move into this direction, and I believe we need to cooperate on it to make sure that the right data is exchanged and that everyone is willing to embark in it and see the benefit for himself.
Okay. Carsten, briefly on the material passport. In our pre-discussions, you mentioned that a couple of times. Is it already there? Is it something that's needed?
Well, the thing with the material passport, it exists today in other industries. It doesn't exist, to my knowledge, in the aerospace industry. But as I said, it starts at the design phase, right, of the product, where you have to then really also look at the entire life cycle of this part until it is then scrapped. right? And this will help to actually create the transparency of that material and what is going to happen with it in the afterlife. And this is something, again, right, digital solutions can help over here, right? We can have a tracing of the material. We know that of the part and what we're going to use that, and that is so important with the material passport. So you really have a clear idea of what you're going to do with it in whatever, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, right? Which is a huge time span compared to other industries like the automotive industry, where actually the product life cycle is much, much shorter, right? And today, you know, probably of like an A320, right? Not a lot of data is digitized. You still have it in paper form, you know, where the digitization plays an important role to really create that transparency going forward. So I think it is a necessity for the circular economy that has to come, that we understand what we're going to do with the material. And I think today we are at the stage where we can decide what we want to do, where we can also influence what it is going to look like in a way. Going forward, if we do not decide to do this, I think we will be forced by regulators to find a solution. And I'm always a proponent of try to define it yourself instead of being defined.
Okay, very good. Andreas, you developed a new product, you developed new supply chains as opposed to the existing ones. Was it easier for you to digitalize, to set it up in a digital and trustful manner from the beginning? How would you say that, or what is your observation there?
So, first of all, my observation on the discussion, this is a very classical discussion. Who takes the lead in the subject? If there is no chef d'orchestre, like the French colleagues say, let's say, nothing will work. But I guess the most important subject, that somebody has to feel himself to be the one to be in the driver's seat, and not just to optimize his individual benefits out of the overall discussion. We are just looking all in the television now at the moment, and you have heard the reporting from the COP28 in Dubai that we have the largest CO2 emission ever this year. Increases in all, we call it industry nations or industrialized nations. Yeah, we need to do something on this one. It is not a subject talking only about money. It is also our responsibility for the entire community, which we have to put in place. Here, and coming to your question, we are trying to play this role. And we are looking from end to end. For sure, we are a startup company. We have to turn our euros 5 times before we can spend it. And the most important subject is first to have a product which is functioning and which is fulfilling the expectations of the market. But on the other side, let's say we do ourselves something. I mentioned already that we are trying to establish our manufacturing areas with green energies, with, let's say, clear collecting the waste in a proper manner and, let's say, bring it back to recycling and so on. We are working with our suppliers. Here, sometimes I would expect a bit more of initiative on their side as well, coming up with ideas in order to help us on the subject, because it is like a bit this discussion over here. We are all sitting back a bit and wait. Yeah, who is now coming and taking the lead on the overall subject? In the eVTOL business, let's say all the companies which are working in this business are trying to take this lead because it's an all-new industry. We can, I would not say start from scratch, because we are certifying our product in accordance to commercial aircraft certification requirements. So we have to fulfill certain rules, for sure. But we can do it different.
You don't have a legacy, simply. Yeah.
We have a certain legacy, for sure, because our certification requirements are based on what has been done by initial subjects which have happened in the aeronautic environment, for sure. But we try to work with the airworthiness authorities in order to explain why a different approach compared to what is the standard approach in certifying an aircraft and, let's say, looking to emission profiles and so on is important to look at. I guess we have the time to give a bit of shape to what we do, rather than to push a new industry in, let's say, what the existing OEMs in the commercial and in the military business have to follow. And this freedom is something where we need to think out of the box. And this is not happening sufficiently. And the entire community, also here, all the suppliers which are in the session today, they have a responsibility to take. They have to come up with ideas, not only the OEMs. It is on all of us to, let's say, do something on the subject.
Okay. Maybe it's a little easier for you as a startup, definitely with a new product, than for the established ones. But
yeah, it is not easier, if I may say so, because let's say all the regulations where the existing companies are benefiting from the so-called grandfathering stuff and so on, and we cannot change, and there's a time to change. And the time to change is not 5 years or something, but in 25 years to have to do something. This is with all respect to the burden which is giving this to the industry, that's for sure. We are hit completely by all the requirements which are coming up at the moment, and we have to fulfill them. And we are doing this with pleasure. It is not easy, but we are taking our responsibility for the environment and for the community serious. The overall emission, let's say, which is coming from the aviation industry is around 3% in the overall contribution to the what we call CO2 emission in the world. But let's say every single step on this one is counting. So here, the cooperation between the OEM and the suppliers is a key subject. Developing new ideas, generating, we are talking about material passports, okay. But all the data collection, continuous exchange of the data, optimizing, learning from each other is a key subject, I guess. Okay. And here we have to do something.
Okay, thank you very much. It goes back to collaboration, trust. Let me just introduce one final thought. Is being more sustainable, reuse, recycling also necessary because of resource scarcity, dependence on materials, accessibility, in this broader context, or is that something of minor importance? Of course, now we always talked about impact on CO2, that's one, but the second that I mentioned, is it something worth looking into and something that also is in your head?
Absolutely.
Maybe Patrick?
Absolutely. I mean, exactly as you said, let's forget about sustainability. You are strategically already forced to think about where certain raw materials are coming from. The availability is getting worse and worse. We have geopolitically a very different world right now. Where can we tap into resources? How can we access those resources? How can we actually transport the raw materials from A to Z is becoming more and more of importance. I think people were used to a world of freedom, and suddenly they see this world has changed within a couple of months. And Carsten can confirm that, especially in the super alloys, when we talk about titanium and other metals, especially on the metal side, we are in a situation where we are facing a very, very difficult sourcing situation where you need to clearly elaborate what your strategies are for the long term. At the moment, we're all firefighting. Yeah, everybody tries to get some material here and there, but what is your long-term strategy? And how will you actually build up your procurement organization, your supply chain organization to keep also on pace? Because legislation is changing, the world is getting VUCA or Barney, depending on which consultant you follow. So you will have to. I think the normality in future is things will change within a couple of months, and are you actually able to cope with that as an organization? Yeah, talking batteries. Yeah, a lot of special.
And you say reuse, recycling simply helps to become less dependent.
Exactly, and that is the point.
Dependence at least to some degree.
Yes. So if you have a closed loop, then obviously you reduce also your dependency on looking for outside material. Yeah, absolutely.
Sandra, is it something that a supplier looks at particularly, or is it also something that Airbus looks into?
It's clearly very important for Airbus as well. Same thoughts, and then we need to optimize. We need to find ways to reduce dependencies on critical materials.
So
Carsten, your customers, do they also
Absolutely.
say that this is a reason why they use you as a company?
Absolutely right, and I think the real big benefit of it is also price stability, right, in terms of raw materials. Right, today, because of the situations we're in, we have seen a huge price increase of the raw materials where everybody is suffering from. Whereas if I recycle the material, and when you look at the melter can use about, in superalloys and titanium, 70% of scrap. And with the buy-to-fly ratio, when we recycle all of the material, we have enough material for the next melt cycle. That means that we really reduce the volatility in pricing significantly. So we can make our lives much, much easier, much more plannable in the future, that we know we have enough raw materials, right? We have price stability over much, much longer time. We are not so prone to all the events that are happening today in the world.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me do a final, we're almost at the end, final round. I take the uppermost question. If you could give only one short key advice for sustainability in the aerospace sector, what would it be? Patrick.
The one advice, I think, continue to work on your data and think about how to exchange data with the one up and the one down in your tier, because this will come. And as Carsten said, it's better we do it ourselves than somebody's forcing us to do.
Okay, very good. Andreas?
Clearly, it's the same. I'm following the same collaboration, working together, exchanging openly and transparent information in order not to have 5 times reinventing the wheel. This is, I guess, the key subject along the entire value chain.
Okay, Carsten?
Ditto.
Ditto.
Same.
Okay, good. Sandra?
Well, not to say the same then, I would say make sustainability a criteria in your selection. When you do supplier selection, when you do selections, have consciously a criteria around sustainability adding to the other criteria.
Okay. Summarizing in one sentence, it's not necessarily a technological issue when it comes to data to reuse, but it's in the end collaboration, trust, sharing of data, openness, transparency that would help a lot to improve the situation. So thank you very much. We discussed beyond SAF, what can the aerospace industry do to become more sustainable. So thank you very much to my panel. Please give my panel an applause. Thank you.
Thank you.